My name is Alan Price. I am director of the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, and together with my colleague, Rachel Day Floor, director of the Kennedy Library Foundation. I should also mention Tom Putnam, former director here at the library. Good to see you back. And on behalf of us and all of our library and foundation colleagues, I'm delighted to welcome all of you to this year's PEN Hemingway Award for Debut Novel Celebration. Thank you for joining us this afternoon to celebrate the work of the 2023 winners and honorees. I'd like to acknowledge all of those who made today's event possible, including the generous underwriters of the Kennedy Library Forum's lead sponsors, Bank of America, the Lowell Institute, and AT&T, and our media sponsor, the Boston Globe, and the generous supporters who help sustain the Hemingway collection and its programs, especially the Hemingway family, Hemingway Limited, and our Friends of the Hemingway Collection members. We're very pleased to be collaborating in co-presenting this afternoon's celebration in conjunction with the International Hemingway Foundation and Society. We are grateful, as always, to the Hemingway family for their continued support of our Hemingway programs, to PEN America for their work administering the award, and to the distinguished judges for the 2023 awards. We're thrilled to have members of the Hemingway family joining us here virtually and watching online. And as always, we send our greetings and best wishes to Ernest Hemingway's son, Patrick, and his wife, Carol. Patrick and Carol have long been the vanguard of support for the Ernest Hemingway collection that resides here in the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, and we are honored to be the world's largest repository for the writer's personal papers and photographs. For decades, Patrick's annual readings from his father's works at the PEN Hemingway ceremony were a real pleasure for us here at the library. In recent years, Dr. Sean Hemingway, the writer's grandson, and his wife, Dr. Colette Hemingway, have taken up this mantle, and together they co-chair the Hemingway Council, which raises funds for and awareness of the collection. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Sean and Colette's daughter, Anouk Hemingway, who will introduce her mother. Anouk has been our guest at many past PEN Hemingway events. I'm truly delighted that this year marks her first appearance at our podium. Please join me in welcoming Anouk Hemingway.
Good afternoon. My name is Anouk Hemingway, and I'm the great-granddaughter of Ernest Hemingway. There has been a long-standing tradition to give Ernest Hemingway a voice at this event, and on behalf of my father, Sean Hemingway, I am pleased to introduce my mother, Colette Hemingway, who will be reading a passage from my great-grandfather's memoir, A Movable Feast.
Good afternoon, everyone. Last year's reading was made in solidarity with our compatriots in the Ukraine, and we are deeply saddened that the war continues. Our hopes and prayers are still with the people of the Ukraine. Today's reading is set in Paris in the 1920s, even as France was recovering from its devastating losses in the First World War. Paris was the meeting place of some of the world's most prominent painters, sculptors, composers, dancers, and of course, writers. My husband chose the following passage as a tribute to this year's Hemingway PEN Award winner, Oscar Hokeah, who is a bright new literary voice, and one that Ernest Hemingway would have admired. It is from the first chapter of A Movable Feast, and is about Ernest Hemingway writing his short story, The 3-Day Blow. It was a pleasant cafe, warm, clean, and friendly, and I hung up my old waterproof on the coat rack to dry and put my worn and weathered felt hat on the rack above the bench and ordered a café au lait. The waiter brought it, and I took out a notebook from the pocket of the coat and a pencil and started to write. I was writing about up in Michigan, and since it was a wild, cold, blowing day, it was that sort of day in the story. I had already seen the end of fall come through boyhood, youth, and young manhood. And in one place, you could write about it better than in another. That was called transplanting yourself, I thought, and it could be as necessary with people as with other sorts of growing things. But in the story, the boys were drinking, and this made me thirsty, and I ordered a rum St. James. This tasted wonderful on the cold day, and I kept on writing, feeling very well and feeling the good Martinique rum warm me all through my body and my spirit. A girl came in the cafe and sat by herself at a table near the window. She was very pretty and a face fresh as a newly minted coin, if they minted coins in smooth flesh with rain-freshened skin. And her hair was black as a crow's wing and cut sharply and diagonally across her cheek. I looked at her, and she disturbed me and made me very excited. I wished I could put her in the story or anywhere, but she had placed herself so she could watch the street in the entry, and I knew she was waiting for someone. So I went on writing. The story was writing itself, and I was having a hard time keeping up with it. I ordered another rum St. James, and I watched the girl whenever I looked up, or when I sharpened the pencil with a pencil sharpener, with the shavings curling into the saucer under my drink. I've seen you, beauty, and you belong to me now. Whoever you are waiting for, and if I never see you again, I thought. You belong to me, and all Paris belongs to me, and I belong to this notebook and this pencil. Then I went back to writing, and I entered far into the story, and I was lost in it. I was writing it now, and it was not writing itself, and I did not look up or know anything about the time, nor think where I was, nor order any more rum St. James. I was tired of rum St. James without thinking about it. Then the story was finished, and I was very tired. I read the last paragraph, and then I looked up and looked for the girl, and she had gone. I hope she's gone with a good man, I thought, but I felt sad. I closed up the story in the notebook and put it in my inside pocket, and I asked the waiter for a dozen Portuguese and half carafe of the dry white wine they had there. After writing a story, I was always empty and both sad and happy, as though I had made love, and I was sure this was a very good story, although I would not know truly how good until I read it over the next day. Thank you.
Thanks so much for reading that passage. I love that passage. I have a very fond memory of sitting in a cafe in Paris with the late Hemingway biographer Michael Reynolds and having a rum St. James and thinking about that passage. I love it. So thank you. And thank you as well, Anouk, as well. It's lovely to see you here. It's just an honor to follow members of the Hemingway family. Good afternoon. My name is Carl Eby, and I'm the president of the Ernest Hemingway Foundation and Society. The Hemingway Foundation was established in 1965 by Mary Hemingway, Ernest's widow, for the purpose of awakening, sustaining an interest in, promoting, fostering, stimulating, supporting, improving, and developing literature. The Hemingway Foundation and Society is proud to promote scholarship devoted to the life and work of Ernest Hemingway, and it's proud to support and promote new voices in contemporary American fiction. As part of that mission, I'm honored to be here to celebrate the Hemingway Award, which each year honors a debut novel of exceptional merit by an American author. For their extraordinary work, I'm delighted to congratulate this year's winner, Oscar Hokeah, and this year's finalists, Xiao Chen, Ramona Emerson, Alyssa Song Siriday, and Lee Wong. I'm grateful also for this opportunity to thank the Hemingway family, the John F. Kennedy Library and Museum, particularly Liz Murphy and Hillary, who put in so much work organizing today's event, the UCross Foundation, which are great partners with this award, and also PEN America, another fantastic partner with this award. And so I want to thank them all for everything they do to support the award, to support American literature, and to honor Hemingway's legacy. I want to thank the wonderful novelist Jennifer Haigh for agreeing to join us to deliver the keynote address today. And many thanks to all of you, everyone here in person, everyone who will see this online, for joining us to see this event today. Finally, I want to extend our deepest thanks to this year's award judges, Gina Apostol, Oscar Cáceres, and Matthew Salises. Distinguished writers all, they generously dedicated their time and energy to the task of reading many incredible, diverse debut novels that were published this last year. And Oscar and I were chatting, and it was, 175 novels, each of them reading about 70 novels. It's a lot of work, and I appreciate it immensely, and I know we all do. We're so glad that Oscar Cáceres is here with us today to help celebrate this year's outstanding honorees. Thank you, Oscar, for your work and for sharing your thoughts on what your panel admired about this year's finalists. I look forward to sharing some of those thoughts with all of you today. And it's now my great honor to introduce this year's finalists for the PEN Hemingway Award. First, I'm delighted to introduce Xiao Chen, author of Activities of Daily Living. More than a novel, Activities of Daily Living is a deep and stirring meditation on what it means to have purpose in life, and how that purpose can be life itself. The presence and absence of this meaning in life overtake Alice, a Taiwanese immigrant in her late 30s, whose life is split between creating a project to document the career of a 1980s performance artist and being a caretaker for her aging stepfather, whose alcoholism and dementia have led to his loss of purpose. Activities of Daily Living teaches us what it is to be engaged and what happens when inevitably we are forced to let go. I'm now delighted to welcome Lisa via video for a short reading from her work.
Hi, I wanted to thank PEN and the Hemingway Foundation and the Kennedy Library for honoring my novel this year, Activities of Daily Living. I'm going to read an excerpt from the book, which is about time and work and art, mostly about time. And in the excerpt, the character Alice is visiting the 9/11 Memorial Museum. Hundreds of people flooded out of the towers had taken the survivor stairs, that morning, which led them past the fire and wreckage on the elevated plaza of the World Trade Center to the relative safety of a Vesey Street below. For years, the stairs remained at their original location, the only remnants of the tower still above ground. But developers eventually won the battle to have it removed, and the entire granite slab was lowered by crane to its underground resting place in the museum. Alice found the Vesey Street stairs wedged between an escalator on one side and a flight of newly constructed stairs on the other. The top of the stairs was roped off with a sign that warned, "Do not touch the artifact." Museum goers were encouraged to walk alongside the ruined stairs in the pantomime of the survivors' descent. Later that afternoon over lunch, Alice told Nobu about the stairs. His eyes took on a distant look. "It's too bad they didn't leave the stairs where they were," he said. "They would have made a very good Thomason." The two friends were in a booth on the second floor of Ho Yip, an old-school, pay-by-the-pound Chinese steam table joint near Zuccotti Park. A Thomason, Nobu explained, is a street artifact that had become useless and derelict because it no longer served its original function. An outline of a window filled with concrete is a Thomason. An amputated telephone pole is a Thomason. A balcony connected to an entrance that's been bricked off. Stairs that lead to nowhere. An artist, Genpei Asegawa, identified the phenomenon in the 70s and named these hollow objects Thomasons, after Gary Thomason, an American ball player who spent the last 2 years of his career playing in Japan and striking out so many times at the plate that the Japanese called him, not without affection, the electric fan. Asagawa thought Thomason's strikeouts were not a humiliation, but actually quite marvelous, Nobu said. Here was this guy who was paid a very good salary to do a job that he was never able to do. The concept of Thomason as a ball player was truer than his actual performance as a ball player. So it was with the phantom structures that bear his name, located somewhere between mind and metropolis in the fault lines of a city's architecture. She recalled that the Vesey Street stairs were not the only Thomason stairs she'd encountered, if she understood the definition correctly. As a high school exchange student, she'd seen an installation of marble stairs inside a museum in Hiroshima. A sign explained that the stairs had once been attached to a bank in the city. Grafted onto the stairs was a murky, dark smudge left by, of a person who had been incinerated on the spot, just after 8 in the morning. More likely, the person had been waiting for the bank to open when Little Boy detonated. On that same trip in Hiroshima, Alice had visited another atomic bomb memorial sites with a group of Japanese high school students. She remembered the group pausing frequently to pose for photographs in front of the famous skeletal dome tower by the river where people threw themselves to relieve their burns. The students beamed and held up their fingers, slinging their customary bunny ears, while Alice, sunk by what she'd seen and too mortified to smile, tried pressing her lips together in the rictus of what she hoped was a look of dignified shame. Nobu nodded. It made sense to him, he said, that a country like Japan, that had been devastated by so many natural and man-made catastrophes, earthquakes, tsunamis, firebombings, nuclear attack, would be home to so many Thomasons. It made sense, too, that the Japanese people would be partial to their peculiar remnant charm, he mused. People who follow Shinto believe they are surrounded at all times by little gods that inhabit everything from the wind, the mountain, the trees. Why not Thomasons? It's like the Thomasons can't forget their purpose. They can't let go of their original post, Nobu said. Maybe there is an unused post out there in the world that can't forget its former life as a post. They laughed a little. At the museum, Alice allowed herself to be led by the building's architectural flow to the gift shop stationed by the exit. When the gift shop first opened, she remembered how the critics had declaimed it, this exchange of money and goods in the secret space. But wasn't shopping the American way of keeping calm and going on? Alice scanned the shelves of stuffed toys and children's books. devoted to the dog heroes of 9/11, the survivor tree tote bags, the never forget bracelets. She tried to picture the person who would buy the necktie designed with the pattern of the Twin Tower tridents, and what occasion he would have for wearing it. Then she pushed through the glass doors that open out directly onto the street. The warmth of the afternoon sun touched her skin as she paused, taking in the honk and rumble of passing cars and the bright clang of the indeterminate present. Hi, I wanted to thank Penn and the Hemingway Foundation and the Kennedy Library for honoring my novel this year, Activities of Daily Living. I'm going to read an excerpt from the book, which is about time.
Great. Next up, I'm delighted to introduce Ramona Emerson, author of Shudder. Part crime thriller, part supernatural horror, Shudder is a genre-bending novel set in New Mexico's Navajo Nation. Rita Totochin has made a name for herself as a forensic photographer for the Albuquerque Police Department, but all the while, she's been hiding a secret. She can see the ghosts of murder victims who then lead her to clues others have overlooked. In Rita's latest case, the ghost helps her uncover a deal gone bad between a drug cartel and a corrupt detective. Rita is haunted by the gift that both drove her from the reservation and that may now get her killed. It's a novel that will stay with you long after you reach its satisfying conclusion. Congratulations, Ramona, and welcome.
My shoes sound so loud. I really would like to thank the Penn and the Hemingway Foundation for recognizing genre fiction, which is something that doesn't happen a lot, and I am so honored. So thank you so much. I'll be reading from Chapter 2 of Shudder today, called Chapter 2, Exacta VX 1000. These lights have been with me for as long as I can remember, and even now I remember almost everything. I was a quiet baby. My grandmother told stories about how I would stay silent for 24-hour periods, depriving her and my mother Anne of sleep because they wondered if I was dead. But there I would be every morning, eyes wide, looking to the sky, where there was a ray of light only I could see. I didn't cry. I was just awake all the time. I think something is wrong with her, Mom. My worried mother would watch me stare into space, letting out a giddy laugh. There is nothing wrong with her, my grandma would say. She's just talking to someone out there, and it's none of our business. I remember my grandma saying this. She looked over her shoulders all the time, trying to glimpse what I was staring at. Now I know there was nothing there. For me, there was a collection of lights and smiling faces, high-pitched giggles and highlighted silhouettes. The lights played with me like parents play with their newborns. They would pull close to me, enough that I could smell their sweetness. I learned to love them and the honey drops on their whispers. They never hurt me or brought darkness to me, so I always smiled back. As an infant, I watched my mother sneak over my cradle railings at night, her creaking camera shutters snapping photos of me while I lay awake. Her eyes were a distant abstraction of brown fragments through the elongated viewfinder. I remember her exacta with the left-handed shutter button, her chipped fingernails, her deep-set brown eyes, just like mine. I remember all of us sitting under the golden light of my mother's bedroom and marveling, awake. I felt the expanse between us as my mother would take frame after frame, pulling the camera away from her face only to look at me like a specimen, a jagged piece of a puzzle that she could not finish. My mother was beautiful, but she was too young to be my mother. Her face was soft and naive with an easy, gentle hint of an unrecognized future. When she held me, I was afraid of falling. Her arms were small, bony, and inexperienced, rocking me from side to side unsteadily, drawing me closer and looking at me with blurry, watering eyes. When I was hungry, she fed me, but her gaze moved past me and into a future that I could not be a part of. How obvious it was that poor Anne had no idea what she was doing with a baby. The conception had been a hurried affair, and I was a haunting reminder of Anne's bad decisions. After 2.5 drinks and a 2-block walk back to her small, cold college apartment, she had finally surrendered to my father, a boy named Abel, who had pestered her for months with smiles and dimples. She tried to take his picture, but he always refused. She pressed the button anyway, collecting photographs of fragmented faces, eyes, and lips, segmented by his intruding hand and frame. The morning after she finally gave in, Abel kissed her and said he would be back. She never saw him again, never in class, never on the street. Her friends remembered him with curly hair and light eyes, but Anne remembered his black hair, straight and shiny, and his eyes, dark brown and mysterious. He had a small mole right above his left cheekbone. Anne had never forgiven me for coming into her life and yanking the brake on her future in the most unforgiving way. Here she was again, living with her mother, me at her breast, my eyes wide open. And what of Abel, this ghost that was my father? She screamed his name as she packed her return home, me in her stomach. She would shout his name in desperation as she walked alone outside my grandmother's house. And for this, I was sorry. 3 years after she had come home to the reservation, on that anniversary, she left us. The house was quiet except for the slow stir of coffee in the kitchen. My grandma sat in the blue of morning, the cresting sun hauling light from her white cabinets. She lifted me on her knee and smiled. We both knew that it was better this way. Grandma's arms were strong and able and experienced. I knew she wouldn't drop me. That was all I saw of my mother for a few years, except for a picture that my grandmother had pinned on her bedroom wall. My mother, wearing a light pink sweater, stood in the rain, her moist hair forming into ringlets. She grinned with her eyes straight ahead. When I made my way into my grandma's room and stared at the photograph, Mom's eyes followed me. I would run from left to right to left, and her eyes turned with me. Sometimes I would just sit and talk to the picture, imagining our conversations. After Mom left, my grandma took me to the medicine man, and he sang for me. His hands were strong and thick but soft. When we came into his house, he spun me in circles. He blew smoke and said prayers. His bone whistle echoed in my head for hours. I finally started to sleep, an hour here and there, eventually in blocks of 3 and 4. I learned early that no amount of prayer or smoke or love was ever going to change the fact that these lights wanted to talk to me. Even at 3 years old, I knew it was something that deeply terrified my grandma and our medicine man. It was something that I was going to have to hide from them. As I got older, I taught myself how to look beyond the ghosts and mute their voices. I learned to listen to the world in ways no one could imagine. My ears focused on the sounds in Grandma's house, the creaking door hinges, the high-pitched scream of Grandma's tea kettle, the tick of her scarecrow clock. I integrated their voices with these sounds, with the songs of birds at my grandma's bedroom window, the constant drone of Highway 666 to our east, and to the whispers of the wind coming through the valley beside the Chisco Mountains. I learned to listen for wild horses running in the wash below the house and the herds of sheep grazing in the valley. Anything to keep the sight and the sound of ghosts from taking over my every waking moment. But no matter how strong I think I am, this thing, call it a gift or a curse, is still a part of me, just like my veins, heart, and hands. It is attached. It is part of my voice and vision, this visually enhanced speakerphone from some other place. I can't turn it off. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'm delighted to introduce Alyssa Song Siriday, author of Little Rabbit. Little Rabbit explores the boundaries between the self and a relationship where the self seems, at least from the outside, to have been abandoned. when a young queer woman suddenly finds herself in a passionate relationship with an older male choreographer, her roommate raises serious doubts about what her friend has gotten herself into and why. The boundaries of their friendship are tested after she leaves Boston to follow the choreographer to his homes in the Berkshires and New York, and into repeated submission during sex. The roommate's skepticism only increases when the young woman, an aspiring writer, decides to move in with her lover. Little Rabbit compels us to question the blurred line between one partner's insatiable desire and another's pleasure from satisfying this desire. Congratulations, Alyssa, and welcome.
Sorry, my shoes are a little slidey on this. Thank you so much. Thank you to the JFK Memorial Library, the Hemingway Foundation, and PEN America for administering this award. And thank you to this year's judges. Writing is a very uncertain activity, and this early sign of confidence is life-changing for emerging writers. So I really enjoy reading in Boston from this book. It's a Boston novel. I wrote it here, and a lot of it takes place here. So I'm going to read a section that takes place in New York. Sorry. Okay. The question of sleeping with the choreographer, of what it would feel like to touch him, knocked around inside of me until winter broke into rainy New England spring. Finally, I came up with an excuse. I convinced a friend at a small cultural magazine to let me profile the choreographer and his dance company. No one would pay me, and I'd have to buy my own train ticket and stay on my friend's couch in Sunset Park. But it gave me a reason to email him that I was coming. Good, he wrote back. You can stop in on a rehearsal. At some point during the train ride down the coast, the cool spring switched to sudden muggy pre-summer, a bubble of heat and humidity that only grew overnight as I sweated and turned on my friend's stiff fold-out couch. The heat dampened my anticipation, muddling my expectations with my own gross humanity. I had to take 3 different trains to get to the choreographer's rehearsal space, and during the journey, I absorbed vast quantities of the city's grime and dirt. By the time I got to the school-turned-performing arts studio, I'd sweated through my linen blouse, my denim shorts, transformed into a swamp of a human being. The cool walls of the old brownstone building mixed with the heat, so the air turned strange and clammy. Walking through the long halls of identical doors, I felt like a child again, suddenly oversized, wandering until I found the sounds of music and counting. I could hear his voice, the sound of his hands clapping. Wiping my sweaty palms on my shorts, I grabbed the door handle and pulled. The rehearsal space still felt like a classroom, the walls a different color where the chalkboards had been. Cool air battled through new aluminum vents. 6 or 7 glorious bodies moved through the middle of the room, cutting around each other, stopping, stretching, lifting, and throwing one dancer to another. Even though I'd never seen anyone else do the things they did, their bending, twisting feet made them seem more human, like they'd found new doors into how to be a body. The choreographer stood in front of them all, watching them, instructing. He wore a white t-shirt, soft black pants, his arms wrapped around his torso as he focused. I could see the line of his waist, the lean muscles that still bound him. More point with the chin, he called. You should be leading with the sternum. Carry the motion through. I closed the door silently behind me, but he still noticed and walked over. Could you take off your shoes, he asked, looking at my dirty white sneakers. A soft matte material covered the oddly springy floor. Sorry, I said, toeing them off. They changed as soon as you walked in the door, he said, looking at the dancers, just a millimeter tighter. I'm sorry, I repeated. No, it's the permanent problem of a performer, he said. It's just too bad you'll never see how they move when we're alone. He went back to his spot, watching the dancers and shouting out commands, suggestions so specific I couldn't follow. The song ended, the performers hitting their last pose. Good work, he said, clapping. Now let's get Jackie, TJ, and Zach for the trio. Jackie was the dancer with the long brown hair. Today, she'd wrapped it up tight wrapped it up in a tight ballerina bun, and dressed her body in a white leotard made of tissue-thin fabric. I stared at the muscles winging across her back, her thighs, until I felt absurd, goggle-eyed. She turned away from my gaze, her forearms up against the back of her head, with her mouth pressed into her bicep. Her right leg was up, and the two male dancers crowded the floor around her, one taking her raised calf in his palm. They held still for a beat, turned to living Grecian statues. Then the music began, and they sprang to life, one male dancer lifting Jackie, their backs to each other, then tossing her to the other who caught her by the waist. She seemed trapped for a moment with her legs stiff behind her before swirling free, the world turned by her hips. "Stop," the choreographer called. "Jackie, you need to be initiating the movement more from the pelvic bowl." He crossed the room to stand next to her, pointing his thumbs at his own hips. "Imagine you have two strings tugging your iliac crests." He swiveled to demonstrate, shifting the balance of his knees. Jackie copied him. I reached into my leather satchel for water, but I didn't have any. I felt pen. "Oh, notes," I remembered. I should be taking notes. "And when you hit the right elbow, hit it." She struck a pose with her right elbow up and out. "You need to point a little higher." He touched her elbow with 2 fingers, adjusting. "And look a little more this way." The fingers went to her cheek, guiding her face. "So you're looking stage left, right there, right at her." They locked on me, the choreographer pointing. Jackie smiled, and I gave a small, stupid wave. Once rehearsal finished, the dancers fell upon their bags, gathering their empty Tupperware, their water bottles, as they reassembled their outside selves. I stood in one corner, watching everyone leave. "Good work," the choreographer said. "See you Wednesday." The last one, TJ, left, and then the choreographer and I were alone. He stood by the door at the opposite end of the room. "Shall we?" Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great. It's now my pleasure to introduce Ryan Lee Wong, author of Which Side Are You On? When a 21-year-old Asian American activist named Reed returns home midway through college and announces to his parents that he plans to drop out and devote himself to Black Lives Matter, he faces serious pushback from his mother, who has her own history of activism during the time of the LA riots. This confrontation manages to be poignant, tender, and very often absolutely funny. Along the way, Reed grapples with how to stay true to his ideals when the world around is demanding he compromise. Which Side Are You On is a novel of our times, as well as one that transcends time. I'm delighted now to welcome Ryan via video for a short reading from his work.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to the International Hemingway Foundation, to the Kennedy Library, and to PEN America for this honor. It's such a joy to be a finalist with such amazing other books, and I wish I could be with you in person to celebrate, but I'm happy to at least share this passage from my book, Which Side Are You On?, in which a young activist goes back home to LA to tell his parents he's going to drop out of college to devote himself to the Black Lives Matter movement. But before that happens, he has to stop with his mother to see his ailing grandmother, his Halmini. And that's the passage I'm going to read now. Halmini lay on a hospital bed staring at me as if I were a stranger. I almost didn't recognize her either. The hair she'd permed and dyed black all my life now grew in a gray shock. Her face was puffy, and the mischievous glimmer in her eyes was gone. Mom and I sat next to each other in plastic chairs. Maybe it would have been better if she'd never come to this racist country, I said. Mom turned to me and arched her eyebrows. Her husband was a dog, and her life in Korea was shit. It's not like she had much choice. You mean your father was a dog? He wasn't a father to me, Mom clicked her tongue. Halmini, for that matter, wasn't much of a mother. Mom leaned an elbow on the back of her chair where her big red Goyard purse hung. It was a top-rate Korean knockoff, and she'd challenge anyone to tell the difference. She'd worn her nice leather jacket, too, as if to say this Koreatown care facility, the buzz of television from the next room, the thick bodily smells, the metal blinds, couldn't touch her. That's a little harsh, considering, I said. What? Said Mom. I'm supposed to be nice because she had a stroke? Traditionally, yeah. This is a time of reconciliation. I got her a nice bed, close to the window, and I brought flowers. Mom pointed at a lavish purple orchid sitting on the nightstand. Hominy gummed her lips, as if to protest, but only managed to show us a handful of bottom teeth. I tried seeing the room as Mom did, but couldn't get past the tubes dangling from under Hominy's hospital blanket, one of which hooked into a feed bag that whirred and slid an inch of goop into her. Nice, I lied. But does it count if you do it so grudgingly? My smart-ass son, said Mom. You don't know the shit I put up with from her. No, I don't. You've never told me. I had some very basic questions about this frail woman lying in front of me that I'd always meant to ask in the future when my Korean was better. That future was gone now. My Korean was still crap. Mom flopped her hand in a lazy circle, dismissing my challenge. A man knocked and strode a little too familiarly into Hominy's room. He wore a black smock with short sleeves and beamed. I thought of the Korean Christians in high school who walked me to the bus stop, invited me to their Sunday morning concerts, and expressed sincere concern for my eternal soul when I declined. The man spoke to Mom in Korean, something about her son, so handsome, and mentioned Jesus, the Savior. I smiled, tight-lipped. He took a small black jar out of his bag, screwed the top off, and dipped a finger inside. He rubbed the pearly lotion into Hominy's cheeks as her eyes swung around the room. I stared at this man, touching my grandmother's face, something I hadn't done since I was a baby. He comes every week to do this for the patients, said Mom. Nice, huh? Mom, this is obviously a last-minute attempt at conversion. Mom relaxed another inch into her chair. Look, she loves it. She would have accepted a facial from a Buddhist monk, too. Religion is the opiate of the masses, I said. Mom sighed. Then Hominy would have smoked it. It's ironic. In a way, this is what she wanted, to lie around all day being taken care of. The pastor screwed the lid back on his jar. Hominy shone like a waxed apple. He stood up and handed us each a pamphlet. Mom took hers and pretended to study it. No, I said, waving him away. Mom jabbed me in the ribs. Are you going to give Hominy her facials? I took the pamphlet and mimed interest in the halo dove soaring across the cover. The pastor beamed at me. I watched him leave, then crumpled the paper and chucked it into the hamper full of used wipes and latex gloves. Thank you so much.
I'm now delighted to introduce Oscar Cáceres, one of this year's judges for the PEN Hemingway Award. He's the author of the short story collection Brownsville and the novels Amigoland and Where We Come From, which have earned him fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Copernicus Society of America, the Texas Institute of Letters, and the Guggenheim Foundation. Since 2004, he's taught creative writing at the University of Texas at Austin.
Thank you, Carl. Good afternoon. As one of the 3 judges for this year's PEN Hemingway Award for debut novel, it's my great honor to present this year's winner. I want to thank Elizabeth Murphy and the Kennedy Library Foundation for the invitation to speak here today, and of course the Hemingways for making this award possible. Last October, PEN America received 175 entries and divided these among the 3 judges, leaving each of us with about 58 books to read in less than 7 weeks. I should mention I'm not a very fast reader. Our judges' packet instructed us as such, quote, "The selected novel will show exemplary talent and promise for future work, as the goal of the award is to identify exceptional emerging novelists." It seemed like such a daunting task for us to find 10 exceptional debut novelists for the long list, and from there to name 4 finalists, and finally, the winner. Some nights, after reading for several hours, I worried that I might be too exhausted, that I would fail to recognize the great work I was holding in my hands. That worry quickly faded with each of the finalists we've heard from today. And then again, when I happened upon a novel titled Calling for a Blanket Dance. What I remember is the voice of each character calling out to me with a quiet and unrelenting urgency. I remember sensing a deep truth in these voices, that this was fiction, but it was also documenting lives that had all too often been dismissed and silenced. I remember feeling that I was holding something special. Later, when it came time to submit my list of semifinalists and then say a few words about my selections, I remember saying very little about Calling for a Blanket Dance. And only because I trusted my fellow judges, I trusted they would hear and recognize the same truth as I had that late one night. I wanted to give them the chance to have the same thrilling experience I had discovering something new and indeed exceptional. I'll now read from the judge's citation. The world woven by Oscar Hokeah in Calling for a Blanket Dance is seamed with heartbreak and tragedy on resistance loom. Thus, this story of interlaced Kiowa, Cherokee, and Mexican lives is ultimately one of triumph, not only of the triumph of art, but of humanity. We see the protagonist, Edward Gissaddle, triumph through the shifting lens of intergenerational memory. We hear voices of pain, betrayal, humor, loss, goodwill, and above all, love. There is much in our current world to bereave, to resist, and to change. With writers like Oscar Hokeah, we, his readers and audience, will also find the stories that bind us if we listen to his art's call. Please welcome Oscar Hokeah.
Sio, Tohij, Oscar Hokeah, Dawado, Talik Janelle, Talik Alatin, Awatessa. Hi, my name is Oscar Hokeah, and I'm super excited to be here. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful to the Hemingway Society, PEN America, and JFK Library for bestowing upon me this amazing award. It's life-changing. And what I would like to do today is just to read a little bit from the debut novel and give you a sense of one of the characters that Oscar had mentioned, and give you a little bit of a sense of the voice and the communities that I write about. So I'm from Oklahoma. I live in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, northeastern part of the state, which is Cherokee Nation reservation. I'm also Kiowa, so I moved back between Lawton and Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Lawton's on the southern plains, and so that's where my Kiowa family is from. And so the novel moves between those two landscapes. And oftentimes when people think of Oklahoma, they think of the southern plains. They think of this like flat kind of expansive area. But the further you move east, you get to a point where you start to see a wood line show up. Then you start to see these hills start to form. And then you're deeply entrenched in the Ozarks of America. And so that's where Tahlequah is located. Tahlequah is in the Ozarks. So a very radically different landscape than we see in Lawton, which is on the southern plains, very flat, very open. And so those are the environments that I grew up in. I grew up moving back and forth between two different tribal cultures, and I try to capture that in my writing. I do that in this debut novel, and I see to do that again as I move forward throughout my career. But what I want to share with you today is a chapter that's the second to last chapter in the novel. The name of this character is Op-E Gimasaddle. And Op-E in Kiowa, it's like mundane translation is big sister. But it also translates to great grandmother. So Op-E, she's an elder, and the main character, Ever Gimasaddle, at this point in the novel, he is an adult and he has kids of his own, and he's trying to do well for his family and keep them held up. And Op-E, who is a distant relative of his, happens upon him, hasn't seen him in a long time, and so that's what we're gonna get ready to see here as I read. And so Op-E is also, like it's big sister, great grandmother, so it hints to that cyclicality of life. When we become elders, then we start to have revert back to childhood in a certain way. But it's also in our community a term of respect. So if someone is that I have a lot of respect for, a lot of honor for, I might call her Op-E as opposed to her name. I would say, thank you, Op-E. I'm grateful that you're here with us today. And so it's just a term of respect. And so on the male side, we have a term called Seigi. And Seigi just means uncle. And it's practical. It means the mother's brother, which is an important figure in our families. But it's a term of respect. So I might tell someone who's my same age, I might call him Seigi. By doing that, we inherently know, okay, this person's saying that they respect me, or I respect them. So Op-E is that kind of a figure in the community. She's a very respectable member of the Kiowa tribe, and has a lot of cultural knowledge, centered culturally, and so she holds a lot of weight. So I'm just going to read a little bit, and then you'll get a sense of who she is and how she kind of correlates to the main character. So we have Op-E Gimasaddle, 2010. All those years, and I thought Lena was Kiowa. Didn't even find out till last year at her funeral. The preacher pulled me aside and asked, Op-E, do you know Lena's clan? I made a face, slapped him in the arm like he was joshing, because Kiowas didn't have clans. Then he went and told me Lena was Cherokee. Aga, here I thought she was Goy all my life. Uncle Vincent had first brought her around when I was just an ankle biter. I must have been 10 or 11 years old at the time. This was before they had any kids. Uncle Vincent and Aunt Lena would travel from Lawton to Carnegie for family visits. Once they had Lila, they visited less. Then after Turtle, they hardly came around. I always remembered Lena because of the quilt she gave me. Then I saw Ever at the gourd dance selling quilts. Made me think of his grandmother, Lena. I watched Hate Quitone spread a Pendleton blanket on the floor in the middle of the powwow arena, not too far from the singers. I thought the societies were honoring the drum, taking up a collection. I think it was Scissortail or maybe Rocky Boys. We invited singers from different parts, so it was hard to say. But it turned out that the blanket wasn't for the drum. It was for my nephew, Ever, his 3 littles, and his adopted son, Leander. Leander worked over in Lawton at the tire plant, so he wasn't there that day. I had never met ever before, even though he was my na'i. He was a nephew through my cousin Turtle, who I hardly knew. Uncle Vincent had relocated to Lawton after he served in the Korean War to find a job. There wasn't much work in Carnegie, so Kai was often moved to Lawton or Anadarko or Oklahoma City. It surprised me to see Ever at the powwow. He had our family's distinctive look, with arms long enough to reach the top of a roof. I couldn't help but think of his mama, the way the corners of his mouth turned downward with sharp lines. But I suppose all us Guimasados had this similarity. Ever led his kids into the arena, and they walked behind from oldest to youngest, like a family of ducks crossing a busy road. They came to stand behind the Pendleton blanket. Sean was the oldest and 10 and the oldest. He took after my Uncle Vincent, something fierce. Then there was Shiloh, 9 and built broad like his Cherokee side. Shandy crawled into my heart as soon as I saw those pigtails. She was 8, but had a younger spirit about her. Hank Quetone had the microphone in his hand, and he announced, "I'm calling for a blanket dance. This is for my nephew, Ever Guimasado, and his kids. The company he worked for lost all its funding, so he was laid off, and his car was repossessed. He's having a hard time getting his kids to and from school. We're asking for any help you can offer." An elder Botone handed Ever a gourd rattle. Then I saw Hank's wife, my cousin Lila, carrying a Gort Club shawl, baby blue, into the arena and heading for Shandy. The shawl was too big, so Lila folded it in half. Shandy struggled to hold the large shawl over her shoulders, shifting this way and that way, the way littles did. None of them had any regalia. They wore jeans and T-shirts. All 4 stood alongside the blanket, waiting for the drummers to start the song. I've seen many blanket dances in my day growing up, but there was something especially heartbreaking about a single parent down on their luck. Many of us, most of us, could see ourselves in Ever, like we had either been where he was or feared we'd end up there. We were taught to give, or else more would be taken. Streams of people walked into the arena while drum beats and voices filled Red Buffalo Hall. We crumpled bills in our hands and tossed them onto the blanket. We stood next to Ever and his 3 kids and danced alongside. Must have been a good 30 people out there. The line of people made a half circle around the drum. Ever and his kids stood to one side with the Pendleton blanket spread in front of them. Some Gort dancers moved through the arena while the singers' heavy and low voices carried through our bodies. We danced the way Kai was danced when called by our people, by our ancestors, to help each other heal. "Whichaw," Hank Quetone yelled into the microphone, "so beautiful." All the dancers dipped a little lower and rose a little higher to the drum beat, and the singers prayed for our spirits, calling for our ancestors. Step into the arena, dance with us, honor this young man and his children. By the time the song was finished, the blanket was filled from edge to edge with crumpled dollar bills, and we were filled with a renewed energy. Sometimes a blanket dance can fill up your spirit, and this was one of those moments. I'll never forget it. A gift. Thank you.
Oscar, thank you. This is easily the hardest thing I've ever had to do, following such powerful, beautiful words. And all of you who have read today, thank you. I have a couple of other thanks that I need to give, if you'll permit me but a moment. Patrick and Carol Hemingway, although you're not here with us today, we know you're watching online, and I want you to know that every one of my colleagues, everyone in this room, every one of my colleagues in the Hemingway Society, we're all thinking of you today, and we miss you. And Sean Hemingway, get well soon. My name is Hillary Justice. I'm the Hemingway Scholar in Residence for the Ernest Hemingway Collection, and every year it's my honor to introduce the keynote speaker. If you will permit me a moment of indulgence, I would like to welcome all of this year's honorees for the PEN Hemingway Award 2023 to joining us in the second Ernest Hemingway century. Because in 1923, an absolutely unknown, anonymous writer who was hopeful, who was hungry, who was uncertain, was plucked out of obscurity by a guy by the name of Edward J. O'Brien, who every year put together a book called The Best Short Stories of whatever year it was. And in 1923, he was holding one of the few Hemingway short stories that hadn't been lost by Hemingway's wife in a Paris train station. So this year, 2023, we move into the second century in which Ernest Hemingway was a published author. So welcome to that community of wonderful, once emerging and now established and beautiful writers. Thank you for your words. I'm so moved, I can barely speak. So I have a dual honor today because I not only get to welcome our keynote speaker, Jennifer Haigh, but I get to welcome her back. Now I'm going to tell you some usual biographical details about Jennifer Haigh for those of you who are watching online and can't read the published program. Jennifer Haigh's works include Baker Towers, The Condition, Faith and Heat and Light, and a book of short stories, News from Heaven. Her books have won the Massachusetts Book Award and the Penn New England Award in Fiction and have been published in 18 languages. That's really cool. Jennifer Haigh is a Guggenheim Foundation Fellow and has won a Literature Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and that's really cool too. And her latest novel, Mercy Street, was published last year. Congratulations, that's very cool. But the coolest thing about Jennifer Haigh, and the reason that my voice is shaking, is that Jennifer Haigh is also a Penn Hemingway Award winner from 2004. And I know that Patrick and Carol Hemingway are with me in spirit here as I welcome you to our stage as today's keynote speaker. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer Haigh.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and hi, Patrick. It's a great honor to be here at the John F. Kennedy Library in Boston. I can think of no better place to celebrate the legacy of Ernest Hemingway and honor the winner and finalists of the Penn Hemingway Award, simply because no president had a keener appreciation of literature and culture, and no American city has a more vibrant community of writers and readers. I'd like to thank Penn American Center for inviting me, the JFK Library for hosting us, and especially the Hemingway family for all they do to make this day possible. For the winner and finalists, this is a day like no other. I know this firsthand because some years ago, I was sitting in their place. The year was 2004, and I was right there in the front row between two of the finalists, Suki Kim and ZZ Packer. And the keynote address, I'll never forget it, was delivered by the great Russell Banks, one of the writers who made me want to be one. That alone would have been enough to make it an unforgettable day. Russell died 3 months ago, but his novels and stories are still out there, inspiring young writers like me. I wish he were here with us today. I like to think he'd be happy to see me standing in his place. I want to begin by extending congratulations to the winner and finalists. Please know that you were not chosen lightly. I also know this firsthand because some years ago I also served as a judge. Trust me and Oscar Hokeah when we tell you this is a rigorous process. I still have somewhere endless email chains between me and Ernie Hebert and Ana Castillo, weeks of discussion and deliberation that went to choosing the finalists. That year, we awarded the prize to Joshua Ferris for his brilliant novel, Then We Came to the End. I'm really proud to have been part of that, to be one of the judges who chose that book, to take some small credit for helping launch the career of this writer who continues to put extraordinary books into the world. As Joshua Ferris could tell you, Winning the Hemingway is one of the best things that could possibly happen to an emerging writer. For almost 50 years, the prize has recognized outstanding books of debut fiction. The winners and finalists have been some of the finest writers of our time: Marilyn Robinson, George Saunders, Colson Whitehead, Sherman Alexie, Jhumpa Lahiri, Lydia Davis, Edward P. Jones, Ha Jin. It's impossible to talk about contemporary literature without referencing those names, just as it's impossible to imagine what American literature would even look like if there had never been an Ernest Hemingway. I was a teenager when I first read The Sun Also Rises. I discovered his short stories just as I was starting to write my own. His spare, exquisite, surgically precise language imprinted on me deeply. It had a cauterizing effect on my own overblown prose. His influence on my style was actually permanent. Because I read Hemingway, I read differently, write differently, think differently. In this room, there are many others who would say the same thing. More than any writer I can think of, Hemingway changed the conversation writers have with themselves. He changed the way I wrote a sentence. He changed the way everyone wrote a sentence. It's fair to say that American literature can be divided into two eras, before Hemingway and after Hemingway. B.H., one of the most celebrated novelists in America, was Thomas Wolfe, whose novel, Look Homeward, Angel, begins like this. A destiny that leads the English to the Dutch is strange enough, but one that leads from Epsom into Pennsylvania, and thence into the hills that shut in Altamont, over the proud choral cry of the cock and the soft stone smile of an angel, is touched by that dark miracle of chance which makes new magic in a dusty world. Then came Hemingway, who wrote sentences like, "The river was there." Not surprisingly, Hemingway was quite critical of Thomas Wolfe. He shared his views with Scribner's magazine, writing, "Dostoevsky was made by being sent to Siberia. I wonder if it would make a writer of him, give him the necessary shock to cut the overflow of words and give him a sense of proportion if they sent Tom Wolfe to Siberia." The river was there. That's from Hemingway's story, Big Two-Hearted River, and I chose it for effect because Hemingway wasn't simply terse, he was that, but he was also capable of great lyricism. And then there's that thing he does with the word "and." The leaves lay sodden in the rain, and the wind drove the rain against the big green autobus at the terminal, and the Café des Amateurs was crowded, and the windows misted over from the heat and the smoke inside. That's one sentence from A Movable Feast. What's striking to me is that there's no connective tissue there, no because, no therefore, and certainly no thence. He simply gives us a series of images and trusts the reader to infer the causality. He allows us the pleasure of connecting those dots. The clauses are strung together in this desultory way that feels completely intuitive, because that's the way consciousness moves. Before Hemingway, no writer had ever replicated that on the page. There's a remarkable book that came out last year called One True Sentence. The editors asked 30 writers, some of the best writers in America, to pick their favorite Hemingway sentence and talk about why it's great. Well, as it turns out, everyone has a favorite Hemingway sentence. Now, I can't think of another American writer who inspires that kind of reverence. Hemingway permanently changed the way we wrote sentences, but along the way, he also became our idea of what a writer was. During his lifetime, he was the most famous writer in America. Whether or not they had read his books, the average person knew quite a bit about Hemingway the man. 60 years after his death, he continues to excite our collective imagination. There have been biographies, films, stage plays, a documentary series by the filmmaker Ken Burns. Paula McLean's very good novel, The Paris Wife, imagines Hemingway's years with Hadley, what it was like from her point of view to live with this young genius who was so driven to make his mark on the world. Maybe this is why people who've never read Hemingway feel like they know him. They have strong opinions about him that have less to do with Hemingway the writer than with some received idea of Hemingway the man. Like many novelists, I also teach creative writing, recently at UMass Boston and now in the graduate program at BU. I teach Hemingway's short stories because each one is a master class in sentence making, in dramatic structure, in writing dialogue and conflict and subtext. But in recent years, I've encountered some real resistance from students to reading Hemingway's work, particularly the very young ones, who are these very idealistic undergraduates who object to Hemingway on philosophical grounds. To them, he's just another dead white man. They call him sexist, racist, and homophobic. Of course, most of them have not read his work. They're reacting to the Hemingway mythology. Hemingway the boxer, the big game hunter, the serial husband. I mean, if your stated goal is to smash the patriarchy, Papa seems like a reasonable place to start. But interestingly, when these students actually read Hemingway, some of them change their assessment. He's still a dead white man. I mean, there's nothing to be done about that. But they begin to see what generations of readers have discovered before them. Hemingway's psychological acuity, his urgency in telling a story, and his exquisite language. Those sentences that look so easy to write but are anything but, as clear as glass and solemn as prayer. Of course, some of my students don't change their assessment. They point out, rightly, that Hemingway writes a lot of violence. His female characters are treated badly. His male characters are sexist and sometimes racist, angry, isolated men who drown themselves in drink. Some students say this is triggering. That's the word they use. To a writer of Hemingway's time, this would be a very difficult concept to explain. The thing is, Hemingway was a realist. By conviction and by temperament, he was a truth teller. He was interested in the deepest impulses of the human heart, and not just the noble ones. His honesty is sometimes brutal, and like all of us, he was a witness to his time. Consciously, and sometimes unconsciously, he reflected the realities of that era, a time of widespread institutional racism, of public injustice and private bigotries, a time when women's opportunities were limited and their lives tightly circumscribed. The world has changed since Hemingway's day, but not enough. And human nature hasn't changed at all. The blind spots we see in Hemingway's characters are the same ones people have today. For all our good efforts, we have not stamped out sexism and racism and homophobia. Every day in America brings another mass shooting, another random act of violence. The world itself is triggering. So if you're really committed to realism, as Hemingway was, your mandate is to show human beings as they are, not as they should be, not as you wish them to be. So reading Hemingway in 2023 will spark some heated discussion, no question, about gender, about race, about cultural bias, all the ways society has changed and all the ways it has not. To me, that is the very definition of relevance, to be able to trigger readers even from beyond the grave. Hemingway was that honest, that unflinching, that accurate. He was that good. Now, the literary landscape has changed dramatically since Hemingway's time. Now we read books by women. Publishers are very intentionally making room for writers of all colors and genders and cultural backgrounds. So more and more, our literature is beginning to reflect the country we actually live in, the astonishing cultural richness of our strange and beautiful and very complicated nation. That's the good news. But, as any working writer can tell you, there is bad news too. For every person who spent the pandemic curled up with a book, there are countless others who spent it staring at a screen. Now that we've all emerged from our COVID cocoons, people seem to spend a lot of time talking about what's on television. The latest Netflix series is now dinner party conversation, even among writers and editors and journalists and academics, the people who are supposed to care about books. As a writer, it's hard not to take this personally, this feeling that literature has become peripheral to the culture. It's bad news for all of us, but it's especially bad news for emerging writers like our winner and finalists. To start your journey as a writer at such a time takes courage and also a certain kind of stubbornness. It's so easy to bemoan the fate of the culture, but as writers, we have more power than most people to actually do something about it. Every writer needs an audience, but we also have to be the audience. We have to become the kinds of readers we all wish we had. I started out talking about Russell Banks's Keynote address 19 years ago. He talked about his own life as a writer and all the ways Hemingway had influenced his work and inspired him. But what I remember most about his Keynote address is Russell's generosity. He made me feel welcome. If literature is a conversation, writers are the ones who get to do the talking. And that day, in this room, I felt invited to be part of that conversation. Today, I want to extend that same invitation to our winner and finalists. As writers, you have exceptional opportunities to make your voices heard. If you love a book, be loud about it. If it's so good it tears you up with jealousy, you wish to God you'd written it, you are morally obligated to tell the world how good it is. Seriously, writers are competitive creatures, but being generous feels better. It's good for you. And advocating for someone else's brilliant work is a privilege, and one that gets easier as you practice it. Write book reviews, post on social media. You can even write an Amazon review, but this is very important. Do not read your own Amazon reviews. Do not ever do this, because there will always be one disgruntled customer who gave your book 1 star because it arrived in a torn envelope. Do not read that. You don't need that rattling around in your head when you're trying to write. Support your local library, your local indie bookstore. Subscribe to a literary journal. Teach a workshop. Encourage good writing wherever you find it. Be generous with what you know. Along the way, if you continue along the writing path, you will be asked to judge contests, to read applications, to review books, to award prizes, to be good literary citizens. Often, this will feel like an imposition, because as writers, we guard our time jealousy. We have to, because it is a known fact that all of life is conspiring to keep us from writing. Trash day, taxes, earning a living. The indictment of Donald Trump, which forces us to spend half the day reading the New York Times. It's really hard to find time to write under these conditions. So yeah, a writer's time is precious. But judging a contest, as Oscar Hokeah has just done for you, is one of the ways you get to be part of the conversation, to shine a light on what is truly excellent, to build the literary culture we all wish we had. So that's my advice. Winner and finalists, join the conversation. Get your stories from novels, not Netflix. Read real literature every day of your life. For a writer, it's a question of nutrition. If you want to keep growing as a writer, you have to nourish yourself with the books that feed your spirit the best books you can possibly find. Also, read poetry. If you hate poetry, you haven't found the right poetry. Aside from the pleasure of reading it, poetry will shame you into writing better. It will remind you where the bar is, how much meaning can be packed into a single line of language. A writer's life isn't easy. This is one of the good days, the very, very good days. But there are setbacks, there is rejection. Sitting alone in a room for hours every day is hard on your psyche, your marriage, your children, your wallet. Far too many good books are going unpublished, uncelebrated, unnoticed, unread. At every stage of a writer's life, there is very little yes and entirely too much no. But, unlike making a movie, writing a novel doesn't cost anything. You don't need anyone's permission to do it. You don't need a studio to greenlight it. The books you write are yours absolutely. Aside from your own body, they're the only things in life you will ever truly own. It's a difficult path, but it is a transcendent one. As writers, we defy the laws of physics every day. On a daily basis, we get to make something out of nothing. Winner and finalists, welcome to the conversation. It's a wonderful life.
Wow, just wow. Jennifer, thank you for the wise words, such inspiration and thought-provoking messages, and I can only make this commitment to you in this moment. When I return home, I will set pen to paper. Many thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us to celebrate these marvelous writers and all they have done to enrich the world. On behalf of my colleagues at the library and the foundation and the International Hemingway Foundation and Society, PEN America, the Hemingway family, and all our honored guests, thank you so much for coming today. Although this concludes our program, it now gives me great pleasure to invite those of you who are here with us in the audience today to join us in the pavilion to celebrate the year's awards during a reception. So thank you very much. We can proceed in that direction.